Welcome to the Purpose-Based Retirement with certified financial planner Casey Weade. Casey is the president of Howard Bailey Financial.
Whatever risk you face during your retirement years, we've got a plan.
A published author and radio host.
It's not how much we make during the good times, it's how much we keep during those really bad times.
His advocacy for retirees and pre-retirees has made him a sought-after speaker and trusted financial leader.
And putting a real plan together.
This is the Purpose-Based Retirement.
It is good to see you again. I'm Lee Kelso here with Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson. They are both certified financial planners with Howard Bailey Financial. We're going to begin the program today with kind of an Annuity 101 course for you, a quick once-over on one of the most widely used retirement vehicles out there. And a little bit later on, questions from viewers are going to be coming up in the program. But we picked the annuity question off the top here because it is something that is very important, widely used, often misunderstood. So let's dive into that, Casey. Give me a quick overview on what is an annuity.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different types of annuities that are out there. From their inception back in the 20s, they came around with immediate annuities. An immediate annuity was essentially a pension. So that's when pensions were created. And a lot of people will say, well, I hate annuities, but they love their pension. Well, your pension is a form of an annuity, just one form of the many different types that are out there. Are annuities right for everybody? Absolutely not. But there are some that may be right for a given situation. Take, for instance, a fixed annuity. We're looking for, say, a fixed rate, and we're looking for a fixed rate of return for a fixed period. Let's say it's 5 years. Well, if we wanted a 5-year fixed rate CD, we might be able to get 1%, maybe 2% today, or we could get 3, maybe even 3.5% today in a fixed rate annuity. Now, might we have bigger penalties and backed by an insurance company versus the FDIC? Absolutely, but we're getting a higher rate of return for that fixed rate of period. That can make a lot of sense for a lot of CD investors. Then there's variable annuities that are out there. Variable annuities are ones that allow you to invest your money into mutual funds inside of this wrapper called an annuity. And inside of that wrapper, they allow that wrapper to create tax deferral. And so it allows your gains to grow tax deferred. But they come with a lot of fees and expenses. But there are some very inexpensive ones that are out there that make sense for individuals that may pay a lot of taxes or have really high incomes. And then there's fixed indexed annuities that are kind of in the middle. They give you the principal protection of a fixed annuity and more growth potential like you might get with a variable. And all of these things may make sense. They may be the worst possible thing you could do with your portfolio.
And I think that's the point, Lee, is it's just there's lots of tools and they're right for some people, they're not right for others, but it starts with understanding your situation and what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. If we're 25 years old and we're buying ourselves a fixed annuity or a fixed indexed annuity or even a variable annuity, we go, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
You know, why? You've got 30 years before you retire, and an annuity was really created for two reasons: protection and income. And if you're using it for some other reason other than protection and income, you're trying to beat the market with it, or you're trying to use it as your emergency reserve fund, or use it as a death benefit, then you've got the wrong purpose assigned to that asset, and you've got the wrong thing in your portfolio, and it may make sense to move it.
So you're using a saw to drive home a nail.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The wrong tool to accomplish the job. Let's talk a little bit about in 2008 when the market tanked. Marshall, you were stuck in the
only,
mutual funds world, right? I'll bet you wish you had annuities to offer clients at that time.
You know, going back to 2008, I think a lot of people forget what it was like, Lee, but it was a really stressful time, especially for those folks that are in retirement. I remember having conversation after conversation. If you remember, it went from this is not good to this is really bad to this is horrible. Is the whole thing going to come crashing down? And just that pure panic in people's voice. I mean, conservative funds still lost double digit in 2008.
There were bond funds that lost well over double digits.
Yeah, I had a bond fund that's always on Kiplinger's top bond list. It lost over 29% from October of 07 to March of 09. That creates panic for a retiree, especially when we work for 30, 40 years to get to this point. Now we're seeing things come down 20, 30%. So I knew Casey at this time, and him and his father, and really I'm on the security side. It was all about growth, and so I'd give Casey a hard time when the stock market was doing well, and I'd say, well, how are your clients doing? You know, things were great, but then going through 2008, that was a time where I started to question everything that my business was doing, and did I have the right tools? So that's part of my evolution.
Because retirement's about reducing anxiety that we've had to live through over the previous 30 years of our working life. Now we just don't want to worry about those things anymore. And I had issues during the upsides. I mean, when we had one gal that we worked with back around 2005, 2006, she probably started working with us, and came on, and she just gave us a little bit. She said, well, my friend said you were really good, so here's part of my portfolio, and she kept another couple of advisors that were out there. And through 2006, 2007, I remember her being very frustrated with us as a team. She'd come in to do our reviews with us, and in 2006, she, up 15%, we're only up 7%. She was only getting about 50% of the gains in the market. Then 2005, the market's up 5%. Now she's only made 2 or 3%, and she's just not thrilled. And we're sitting there thinking, well, you're up 10% over 2 years, made 5% a year in a safe vehicle. This is a good thing, right?
Right.
And then 2008 happened. At 2008, the market's down almost 40%, and now she's coming in for another review, and we're thinking, well, now she's really going to be upset because we didn't make anything this year, right? Well, when she came in, she actually came in, gave us a hug, and brought in some brownies at the same time, because she said that all of her other advisors had lost double digits in their portfolios. All of her friends were in a panic, and they had anxiety over running out of retirement savings, and we didn't lose anything. And that's where these types of vehicles come into play, is when we get to those points in our life when we're saying, I want growth, but I don't need to hit any home runs anymore. I just need to protect my principal, make 3 to 5%. That's where something like this might come into play. But you have to watch out for the landmines that are out there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. So what are those landmines? What do I need to watch out for?
Yeah, we say this all the time, Lee. You could lay out probably 100 annuities on the floor, and we'd probably like 5 or 6 of them. The reality is that I want to dig in and truly understand. I was that kid that took apart everything just to see how it worked. And with annuities, that's where I had to come on board and really understand how they work, how you make money in them, and really understand them. So it's good to, number one, understand what type of tool it is and what it's good for, but also how it works. And so we just want to make sure that we're watching out for some of the pitfalls, because we do have limited liquidity when it comes to those assets. So you need to have enough set aside to make sure if you have emergencies, you've got other foundations, but that's part of a comprehensive
And you
plan.
also need some assets that are set aside for growth and inflation protection, and annuities aren't the best thing to be passing on to your heirs, so we need to have something set aside for estate planning. But when it comes to income planning, that's where they can come in handy. We can get the best guaranteed income from those types of vehicles, or we can get a bond-like return with better protection in the world that we live in today. And that's what a lot of retirees are looking for, is a safe rate of return. But there's some of them out there that I've seen people walk in our doors where they only get 2.5% participation in the market. I can only make 2.5%, 3.5% a year in any given positive year in the market. While there's other accounts that are out there today that give us 45% or 55% participation in the market with no fee, no spread. Our gains lock in every 2 or 3 years, and with a 45% participation rate, with our gains locking in every 3 years, the worst period we would have had in history would have been from the peak of market in '99 to the bottom of the market in 2011, and during that period of time we still would have returned about 3% a year, and the market would have been negative about 2 or 3% a year of that same period of time. And during a good period of time from '89 to '99 we would have made around 9%. Well, the market did about 16. So here's a good place for us to make 3 to 5, but there's some of them out there that are built more to compensate the advisor than they are to really compensate the client. And that's why if you own an annuity, you have to get it looked at. If you don't understand it, make sure you sit down with an independent advisor that can explain to you all the ins and the outs of what you have, and make sure it's the right vehicle for the job, and you even should be in a vehicle like that.
Well, if you'd like to learn more about annuities and investing in general, you can pick up a copy of Casey's book. It's called Your 2017 Guide to Maximizing Retirement Efficiency. You can download the first chapter free at thepurposebasedretirement.com. We'll be right back in just a second with viewer questions. Stay with us.
When you have confidence in your retirement future, you can live the life you've always imagined. Because of planning, you now have time to reflect on the wonderful memories of your life. You and your spouse finally have the luxury of leisure time together. To spend fun times with your grandkids, sharing the joy of their excitement about life. smiling at the thought of quality time with your children and of picking up the check. At last, you have time to breathe and rekindle the love of your life. Why? Because you imagined what could be. You planned for retirement. So today, you own your future.
You need a plan for retirement to create the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. The first step is to tune into the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with your hosts, Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson, every Saturday morning at 11 and Sunday afternoon at 1 on 1190 WOWO and 107.5 FM.
Thanks for sticking with us. Each week we invite questions from our viewers. We ask some of those folks to join us on the air, and that's what we've done today with Judith in Milford. Judith, what's your question?
I heard on PBS that the usual rule of thumb is that in retirement, a person will need roughly 80% of their current income to live comfortably. So I assume if I'm making $100,000 a year now and I'm 60, that when I retire, I should only need $80,000 a year. Do you think that's a realistic guideline?
Oh, good question.
It's a great question, Judith, and I think it's a realistic guideline for those individuals that are maybe further from retirement than you find yourself. At the age of 60, you're probably within the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to be stepping into retirement, and so we should be able to start to put together a budget now. So sit down, put together a professional budget using a professional budget spreadsheet, or you can email us and we'll send you a copy of a budget so that you can fill in those numbers, or use some of the apps that are available that are free today you can find online. Figure out exactly what you're spending today, and then that can lead you to the true number. Those are great rules of thumb that we should use when we're maybe 20, 30, 40 years out from retirement. When you've got a lot of time in order before you step into retirement, that can be a good rule of thumb, but we should really just base it on what our actual expenses are. And you're so close that that's exactly what you should be able to do, is put together a budget, see what your expenses are, and then we can start solving for what that retirement income need really is. I've seen people that have stepped into retirement and needed more income than they needed prior to retirement. I've got a couple from Auburn that right before they stepped into retirement, they were only spending about $40,000 a year. But now we put together a plan so that they could spend closer to $75,000 a year. They're going to sell their home, they're going to get another home in Florida, they're going to get an RV, they're going to travel the country and do some global traveling at the same time, doing things that they just didn't have time to do when they were working. And so some people actually need more income as they step into retirement, and other people need less income than they had in their pre-retirement years because maybe they're just not quite as active. They don't have the same commute back and forth that they used to have at work, or they're not going out to eat at lunch, they're eating that lunch at home. There's just too many different variables for you to start using rules of thumb at this point in the game. It's time to sit down with a financial planner that can make sure you're asking all of the right questions, not just about your income and expenses, but about your emergencies, about inflation, about health care, about taxes. All these things have to come together to give you a truly comprehensive strategy and give you that peace of mind, not just guesswork or rules of thumb, but true peace of mind comes with certainty.
Hey, thanks, Judith. That's a great question. Let's get on to Bruce in Fort Wayne. Bruce, go right ahead.
I'm conflicted about whether I should invest in actively managed funds or index funds. Ideally, I'd prefer to keep things as simple and straightforward as possible. Do you have any words of wisdom?
Well, Bruce, I think it depends on where you're at. If you're in retirement or what you're looking for long-term growth, when do we need these funds? Because actively managed funds typically underperform the market. And there's about 75% of actively managed mutual funds underperform their benchmark. And so they're dramatically underperforming what you might be able to get in, say, an S&P 500 index fund. And that's a great place for you to be if you don't need the money for a long period of time. Now, while actively managed funds may underperform the broader stock market indexes, that can be okay as long as they don't lose as much as some of these broader stock market indexes during the bad years. You're going to find more volatility and more growth potential when you look at those index funds that aren't actively managed, and they're very straightforward. There's not a lot of activity going on in there. They're lower cost and they're typically better performing long term. However, there's more volatility. And if you're in retirement and you're taking a retirement income stream, you may not be able to handle that volatility from both a stress and anxiety standpoint, but also from just a reverse dollar cost averaging standpoint, an income standpoint. As you're beginning to take withdrawals from these IRAs, from these actively managed accounts, then they can start to protect you against the downside. So while maybe we only make 5 to 6% now, our downsides may be only 10 to 20 versus averaging 6 to 8% and having a downside of 30 or 40%. So I hope that helps, Bruce, as you start to evaluate these questions. And asking the right ones is really, what do I want this money to accomplish for me? What's the purpose?
And we're going to jump north to Auburn. And Raymond, what's your question for us today, Raymond?
I'll be retiring next year and like for my wife to become more involved in our financial matters, but I can't get her to take any interest in the process. I'd really like for her to understand everything because I'm almost 10 years older than her, and she'll almost certainly outlive me. Is there anything I can do to help her understand the importance of it, or should I just relax and not worry about it?
Well, Raymond, a lot of this lack of involvement in the financial side of things comes from a lack of confidence. And some of that can be a little dampened if we take our time and ease into this situation rather than throwing it all in somebody's face all at once with a lot of things that they may have never been introduced before or are just simply uncomfortable with. And it's great that you're thinking about involving your spouse. Your wife really needs to be involved in this process in case something were to happen to you. But start incrementally. Let's just start with some very basic things. Let's start with maybe starting to pay some bills, planning some vacations, and then figuring out the difference between buying a car and leasing a car, and then stepping into some of the retirement accounts as we begin to say, well, how much should we be saving? Should we be putting in Roth? Should we be putting in tax deferred accounts? And then we get into maybe picking some of the individual investments and saying, what are the pros and cons of each? But we incrementally do this rather than throwing someone to the wolves. We want to take our time. And some of this can be done by sitting down with a professional that's going to sit down and really spend some time carrying with you on a one-on-one basis and not making it overcomplicated, especially in a first meeting. That first session, with a financial planner, there should be no talk about investment products or investment vehicles or the stock market or anything that's all that complicated, any more complicated other than just starting to ask what your goals are. And sometimes making sure you and your spouse are on the same page is the first step to that. And that can really illustrate the importance of the whole process and ease them into that process step by step. We want to make sure that both spouses are involved so that if something happens to one, there's somebody else that can pick up the pieces and really somebody that can be there to hold your hand. Thanks for asking that question. Thanks for thinking of your family, Raymond.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. And if you'd like to get a head start on all of that, I'd invite you to check out Casey's new book. It's your 2017 guide to maximizing retirement efficiency. You can order the book online at thepurposebasedretirement.com or download the first chapter of his previous book, The Purpose-Based Retirement. You can download that first chapter for free, also right there at purposebasedretirement.com. So let's roll on to our question of the day. Which of these investment options does not grow tax-free? Good question. There's the choices. We'll have the answer when we come back.
You may have a purpose for your retirement, but have you repurposed your assets to help you achieve your dreams?
At Howard Bailey Financial, we believe in the purpose-based retirement. We help you determine a clear plan of action to get you to your goal. We can help you review all of the variables, find and understand your options, and help you come up with a strategy that gets you closer to your purpose. Let Howard Bailey help you achieve the retirement you deserve.
You need a plan for retirement to create the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. The first step is to tune into the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with your hosts, Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson, every Saturday morning at 11 and Sunday afternoon at 1 on 1190 WOWO and 107.5 FM.
So heading into the break, we asked you the question, which one of these various financial instruments does not grow tax-free? Casey, which one is correct?
Well, Lee, the answer is C, life insurance. We had stocks and corporate bonds on there and annuities. Those different vehicles can potentially grow tax-free as long as they're in some type of Roth IRA. An annuity typically grows tax-deferred. If it's not in a Roth IRA, that means it's growing tax-deferred and it'll come out as ordinary income. If you have stocks and bonds, they may be generating dividends and interest and taxes every single year. And then they also may generate capital gains at some point in the future. Now you have to ask yourself, am I using the right tool for the job? And there's three different types of assets that you have, and they all come with different tax ramifications. What we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk about diversifying your tax buckets based on the right purpose for the job. That first thing that we have there is a capital asset. A capital asset would include things like investments in maybe your real estate, maybe you have ownership in a business, maybe even stocks and bonds that you have in a brokerage account. Then we have retirement assets. Now, retirement assets are designed specifically for retirement income. There's a reason that Uncle Sam gave you those 401ks and the tax deferral benefits of your 403bs and your 457s. These types of accounts are meant someday so that you can create your very own pension. They're meant to take a little bit out at a time and help you to create income. Then there's tax preferred assets. Those tax preferred assets are going to receive tax preferential treatment in the way of being tax-free, not just tax-deferred. That's going to be things like Roth IRAs and cash value life insurance. And there's pros and cons to each. Now, there's three different stages that everyone goes through during their financial life. You'll have your accumulation stage, then you'll have your distribution, your retirement phase, and then you have your legacy phase, your estate planning phase. Those are the three main phases you're going to come through, whether accumulation, distribution, and phase out. So our first thing is capital assets. When we look at capital assets, what can we do to accumulate those capital assets? We could purchase a home, and that's kind of like making a required payment or required savings every single year with our mortgage. We could fund a college education, we could start a business, invest in stocks and bonds. When we look at our retirement income assets, here are places that we can start to stuff money away for retirement. Retirement could be 401ks, 403bs, 457s, traditional IRAs, maybe even annuities growing tax deferred. Then there's our tax preferred assets. That's going to be Roth IRAs and cash value life insurance. But there's no silver bullet. There's pros and cons to each one of these individual things. Take, for instance, your capital assets. When we look at capital assets, we do get tax deferred growth. In all likelihood, we're not paying taxes until we actually decide to liquidate those assets, but we don't have a tax deduction for our contributions, and it's not growing tax-free. It may ultimately be subject to a capital gains rate at some point in the future. Then there's our retirement income assets. When it comes to our retirement income assets, they're going to be tax deductible and tax deferred. However, when we take those funds out of those IRAs, etc., we're going to end up having to pay taxes on them at an ordinary income tax rate. Then we have our tax preferred assets. Now here we've got tax deferred growth, we've got tax-free opportunity to take money out or leave those assets behind. The downside is that we don't get a tax deduction when we put those things into those accounts. However, sometimes it's good to go ahead and bite the bullet and let those things grow tax-free so that we can take them out and grow tax-free later years. What about funding retirement using these three assets that we have access to? Our capital assets, how could we fund it? Well, we could downsize, we could sell our home, we could transition out of a business, maybe sell your business, sell investments like your stocks and bonds. Our retirement income assets start to take regular distributions periodically in order to satisfy our regular income needs. Our tax preferred assets, maybe they're loans or withdrawals from life insurance policies or distributions from our Roth IRAs, but there's pros and cons to each of these as well. Our capital assets, do we have tax deductible contributions? No. So no tax deductible contributions, no tax advantage distributions, but we do have tax deferral in our accumulation. So our stocks grow tax deferred until we ultimately sell them, and then we have to pay taxes on the appreciation at capital gains rates. And retirement income assets, they're tax deductible, tax deferred. However, we have to pay ordinary income when we take distributions. Our tax preferred assets might grow tax-free for distribution, might not be taxable today, but the downside is we didn't get a tax deduction. What about funding your legacy, those assets that you want to potentially leave behind for the next generation? Well, our capital assets, we could sell our home, we could pass it on to our heirs, we could transition out of your business, pass it on to your children, or we could sell out of those investments or pass them on. Our retirement income assets, our 401ks or IRAs can also be left behind to the next generation. However, they may have to pay taxes on those things. Now they're going to be forced to begin to take distributions. Our legacy assets, beneficiaries receive the death benefit from our life insurance policies or Roth IRAs. But there's pros and cons to those things as well. When we look at leaving behind our capital assets, we may be able to avoid the probate process altogether if we set up our transfer on deaths and payable on deaths on our checking account. Even think about doing that on your home. We get a step up in basis on those assets as they pass on, so they can pass on tax-free potentially, but they're not free from potential estate taxes. Our retirement income assets, we have the downside of no step up in basis, and we may potentially pay estate taxes on it, but they can avoid probate if established correctly. Our legacy transfer assets, those tax-free, those tax preferential things, are now tax-free from probate. They pass on tax-free. However, we may or may not be able to avoid estate taxes by using specialized trusts to pass those things on in order to avoid estate taxes. So here's the takeaway. Are your assets allocated for the right purpose? Are they in the most efficient place to most efficiently accomplish your goal for that asset? You have to use an asset dedication strategy. Have you diversified your tax buckets, or is everything going into IRAs and 401ks and you're losing flexibility? And what stage of your financial life are you in? And that might be the most important takeaway that you get from the show today, is to sit back and say, where am I? Am I in my accumulation stage, but I'm acting like I'm in my retirement stage? Or maybe you're in your retirement stage and acting like you're in the accumulation stage. Maybe you're in the legacy stage, and you really should be focusing more on tax-free heirs and passing those assets on to the next generation rather than focusing still on accumulation like you did when you were 35 years old. Lee, back to you.
Well, you know, there are a lot of different choices you have to make, lots of complex issues, and that's why I think it's a great idea to talk with a professional. And a point where you can get started at that is with Casey's new book, The 2017 Guide to Maximizing Retirement Efficiency. You can order that book online or get a free download of the first chapter of The Purpose-Based Retirement, his previous book, at thepurposebasedretirement.com. It's an opportunity to get an education about your money because, as you know, we want you to make the best possible decisions for yourself moving forward. And we hope that we'll see you next week right here on The Purpose-Based Retirement.